Hello. Like Dr. Malinchuk said, my paper is called The Misrepresentation of Crime in the Media and Its Detrimental Effects on the Public. So I begin my paper by examining the strong hold that media has on our society. And although we may not know it or think about it a lot, the media impacts us on a day-to-day basis through television, movies, books, and the continually growing world of social media. Because we have such a plethora of information surrounding us, coming at us from every single angle, it's not always easy to recognize what information is authentic and what is not. So from here, I get a little bit more specific and focus strictly on the media's portrayal of crime, criminals, and the criminal justice system. So because 90% of Americans will not be victimized by serious street crime, the media becomes a prime source of information about crime for the public. And this is problematic for one simple reason. The media coverage of crime and criminal justice is inaccurate. I use an example in my paper to show how the media affects us in ways that we may not think about. I talk about how both fiction and reality come into play when young women decide to carry a pocket knife or a can of pepper spray around in their purses, or when someone decides to skip a late-night trip to the supermarket or to their local shopping mall because they're afraid of something terrible happening. In reality, is something really going to happen to us? Probably not. And although it is better to be safe than sorry, we definitely believe that the chances are higher than they actually are. And for this, we can credit or blame the media. For this paper, I focused on one aspect of the media, television shows, or more specifically, fictional television shows, Law and Order and Dexter. I chose to look at fictional television because crime is currently a major genre in the television industry. It has its own category on some of the most popular online streaming services, such as Netflix and Hulu, allowing people easier and quicker access to their favorite crime TV shows. I found that 32% of the most popular TV shows of the 2017-2018 season were directly related to crime in some way. Fictional television shows have the potential to lead viewers to have unrealistic and untrue expectations of crime and its components. This phenomenon is called social constructivism, which is defined as a theoretical view in which people create reality, the world they believe exists, based on their own individual knowledge and from knowledge gained from social interactions that they have with other people. In other words, social constructivism is when people use what they see, hear, and know to subconsciously create their own reality. An example of this would be the CSI effect. And for those of you that have never heard of this, the CSI effect is a term that is named after the hit show CSI and was coined by the mass media when law enforcement officers, lawyers, and judges realized that shows such as CSI were influencing the jurors to wrongfully acquit guilty defendants when no scientific evidence had been presented. This happens because viewers have become so accustomed to cases being solved using the forensic evidence because they see it on their favorite TV show, like CSI and many others. This misconception that jurors were bringing into the courtrooms with them became a problem because it made it more likely for the jurors to determine that the alleged criminal was not guilty for the crime in which they were being tried for. I was fascinated by the CSI effect, so I wanted to delve deeper into different crime shows to see how they portray crime and what conclusions the public could be misled to believe from the plots, scenes, and dialogue from both Dexter and Law and Order. I chose these shows because they're both very popular. They both focus on crime, yet their storyline and structure stand in stark contrast with each other. Law and Order is a police procedural and a courtroom drama that focuses on NYPD homicide detectives investigating a crime, apprehending a suspect, and the district attorney prosecuting the defendant. The first element of this show that stood out to me the most was the linear quality of each of the cases. And by this, I mean that throughout the show, there are no setbacks or retracing that has to be done to solve the crime. And the detectives rarely have to go back to the drawing board, but instead they talk to witnesses, and each of those witnesses all have information that is crucial to the case and lead them closer and closer to the perpetrator. However, in real life, that rarely happens, as cases involving violent crimes often take weeks, months, or sometimes even years to be solved. And often there are setbacks, and there is retracing that has to be done. So this has the potential to paint a false picture of how law enforcement works and how cases are solved. I also found that there was racial and gender bias of both criminals and victims in Law and Order. So a study that I had found analyzed the race and gender of over 1,100 criminals and over 1,500 victims from 731 episodes between Law and Order and two of its most famous spin-offs, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, Special Victims Unit being one of them and Criminal Intent being the other. Just to name a few of their findings, they found that roughly 80% of the criminals and victims in Law and Order were Caucasian, while the percentage of African American criminals and victims fell at about 10%. Pertaining to gender, the Law and Order shows overrepresent women as criminals and underrepresent them as victims. Although these may not be stereotypes that we're used to seeing, they are still a distorted representation that can easily cause the public to have skewed views of real-life criminals and victims. Dexter is a show that draws such a fine line between good and evil that it is almost undistinguishable. It is about a man who may seem ordinary at first glance, but hides a deep and very dark secret, that he is a serial killer. However, he only murders other killers. This creative concept was probably what gained the popularity for this show, but it also caused a lot of controversy. Concerns were raised about how the show could be justifying crime to the public, or more specifically to the younger viewers. The argument could be made that Dexter's character in general is sending the message that killing is okay. And the Parents Television Council referred to Dexter as a new low for television that glamorizes dismemberment and serial murder. They go on to say that by casting a serial killer in an approving light, CBS is giving Americans, and especially children, one more gentle nudge down the slippery slope towards viewing heinous violence as normal and even desirable. In fact, there have been numerous murders that have been said to be inspired by the show Dexter and his character. So to sum it all up, I will now read an excerpt from the conclusion of my paper. The media is not portraying crime inaccurately by accident. There must be some rhyme and reason to all of these implications and falsities. After examining the many ways that media misrepresents crime, criminals, and the criminal justice system, it might make one wonder why the media, through television and movies, is so consistent and adamant on painting a false picture of crime. The answer to this is simple yet controversial. If it bleeds, it leads. Although a cliché phrase, the if it bleeds, it leads mindset is unfortunately the case with the American media and is sure to boost television ratings. Whether or not this immense effect that the media has on people's lives is something that can be prevented is up for debate. To prevent something from happening, it's the easiest to start with the first step, finding the cause. Is it our fascination with violence and evil that causes so many media outlets and television networks to make crime shows that depict crime and criminals in a deceitful light? Or is it the media that first caused our love for all things crime and criminal? To this question, Dr. Lane Carruthers says that violence has been a part of American popular culture since well before the emergence of modern electric entertainment. The shock value of violence has been demonstrated to be an effective means of drawing and keeping an audience. Violence sells, and it only sells because we like it. On the other side of the argument, Dr. Robert McChesney says what is demanded depends to a very large extent on what is produced, rather than the other way around. In the end, the whole world revolves around money. The media is going to show the public what they believe the public wants to see, or in other words, what's going to make them the most money. In 2004, 5 huge corporations owned most of the newspapers, magazines, books, radio and TV stations, and movie studios in the United States. Due to the monopolization of the media industry, it becomes easier for them to distort information. These corporations are so large and money hungry that efforts to seek profit may interfere with their ability to show and to depict truth and reality through the media. Now, none of these implications are made to assert that all crime shows are bad, wrong, evil, and that they should all be canceled because they are a detriment to the minds of the public. Instead, these implications should be seen as a statement to make crime show lovers and all television watchers in general a little bit more aware that fictional television really is just fictional television, even if sometimes they will try to emulate reality in a distorted way. The media's ability to creep into one's mind and create a socially constructed reality may be an unconscious learning process, but being more aware of how a socially constructed reality is created makes it easier to attempt to align a person's socially constructed reality with actual reality. Thank you.